Hi, good afternoon. My name is Carlos Gonzalez, and I am going to speak to you about Ernesto Che Guevara, which was one of the leaders of the Cuban Revolution as we have studied during the semester. We know that him and Fidel Castro had a very unique and close friendship, and we know that they met in Mexico. Okay, so as we all have studied throughout the semester, the influence and subjugation of the United States has been felt throughout this whole Western Hemisphere, where Cuba was no exception. Ernesto Che Guevara is born on June 14, 1928, in Rosario, Santa Fe, Argentina. He is the son of a middle class doctor, and his mom is a stay at home mom taking care of the children. His father practiced medicine in the city of Buenos Aires, Argentina, but shortly after Ernesto is born, he develops chronic asthma. So his dad is forced to look for a different location within Argentina that has a different type of climate. So his dad moves the family to an area of Argentina, to a province called Altagracia, which means high grace, and it's a mountainous region west of Buenos Aires. I believe the elevation is 1,800 feet above sea level. So this environment and this ecosystem per se is well suited for people who have asthma, and Che Guevara or Ernesto is one of them. The reason I bring this up is because this location, this mountainous location, is basically like a farm, because all the people that live there are farmers. His dad is the town's doctor, basically. So he's the one that treats all the family members of the ranchers that live in that location, in that little city. The reason this is important as far as Ernesto is concerned is because this is the location where the seed of that revolutionary spirit begins. It is where that seed is planted. He is away, the Guevara family is away from the influence of the city, away from all the things, the negative things that come from the city, the altered media, all the politics, all the negative things that the city can bring. He's completely away and separated from this. So he has a very humble upbringing in this area. And this helps shape his character, his way of thinking, the way that he is to become. So in essence, it makes him the man that he will become in the future during the Cuban Revolution. The other thing that is important as far as his formation period is that all of his friends are of a lower economic class than his family is, due to his father's profession. So they're considered a kind of high middle class Argentinian family. Another important factor to consider is that he's not only Argentinian, or he not only does have Argentinian descent in him, but he also has Irish descent, which is very interesting. Because as you know, the Irish have always had struggles within their own country, and they tend to have a firm character and a strong will, and they're not afraid to fight. Che Guevara would be no exception to this. His dad talks about him having ownership of an extensive library within the Guevara house. Ernesto, when he was bored, believe it or not, he would do what a lot of us don't do as kids, and that's to pick up a book and read. So he would spend hours upon hours in his father's study, and he would read all these books, and he would read books like from Lenin and Engels and Marx, philosophers, historians, mathematics, science. He would read all these subjects. So by the age of 15, he had read this library that his dad had of over 3,000 books. So interestingly enough, when we were all kids, we would play. I don't remember reading that much when I was a child, but this is what Ernesto does. And a lot of it is due to the environment that he's being brought up. At the age of 15, he's read all this. So by the time he becomes a teenager, he starts to become aware of the the disparity of class and wealth in his native Argentina. He decides to join he decides to go to the Argentinian University in Buenos Aires and study medicine like his father did. So in 1947, he enrolls in the Buenos Aires School of Medicine and starts to study medicine. While he's there, he's educating his mind. He's learning and reading more. Like we all know here that college opens your mind and broadens your knowledge base. The same thing happens to him. And he realizes that not only Argentina is affected by American imperialism, but the whole scope of the entire Latin American continent is influenced and affected so severely by this American oppression that he decides to take a trip per se. And the first one that he takes is in the early 50s, 1950, between 1950 and 1951. He takes a motorcycle trip to northern Argentina, and he has a friend that is at the school with him that kind of joins and helps him in this trip. Not helps him, but joins him in the trip. And they go through northern Argentina, and in this trip, they meet this government official who is part of the Perón political party, and they're promoting what Perón is doing for Argentina, for Argentina, and how he is basically making changes for the better. And Che likes this. He gravitates towards politics. He has a very vivid hunger for politics and influence of the masses. So he goes through this trip and comes back with that seed that I was talking about. His fervor for politics and to change the world is fed even more. So the end result of this trip is that he's had it. He understands that American influence is a negative oppression in Argentina, and if it's happening in Argentina, it's happening in other parts of South America. He graduates from the University of Buenos Aires in 1953 and begins his second journey. And that second journey takes him through Chile, to Peru, to Paraguay, to Ecuador, to different nations within Latin America. But interestingly enough, his friend that went with him during that first trip has friends that work for United Fruit Company, and as we all know and have studied throughout this semester, that's the company that owned 85% of the land in Guatemala. At that time in Guatemala, we have the president Jacobo Arbenz, which is the only president in the history of the Guatemala government up to that point that has won a democratic election, and he starts to make changes in Guatemala where they start to nationalize all the natural resources and try to bring the richness that Guatemala has, that basically the United States has been stealing from them, back to the people of Guatemala. Ernesto makes contact with one of the members of the Arbenz government and meets Jacobo Arbenz. And we're talking about late 1953, early 1954 is the year that we're talking about. Well, ironically enough, he actually catches a trip on one of the ships that is owned by United Fruit Company, and it's owned by a friend of his friend that is going to take him to Guatemala. And that's how he gets to Guatemala. It's not through his bike, and it's not through an airplane. It's through he basically catches a ride on this boat that is owned by United Fruit Company. And in this boat, he makes contact with other local indigenous people that are working for the company, and he vividly sees firsthand the exploitation of the natural resources, not only of Guatemala, but also of the native indigenous people that are working for United Fruit Company. And his feelings against the United States are even fed more. He realizes even more vividly that the United States is just there to exploit Latin America for everything that they have, and they don't care. And he does not like this. He leaves Guatemala very confused and irritated, but with the willingness of wanting to do a change and a positive change. At this time in Cuba, Fidel Castro has been captured by the Batista regime, and he is now, as you know, Fidel Castro studies law, so he, by profession, he's a lawyer. Okay, so not only he's a revolutionary fighter, but he's a lawyer, and Che Guevara is a doctor. So we're talking about two educated males, people that think, that have reasoning and intellect. So we're not talking about ignorant people that decide to pick up arms and just, let's start a war. These are educated people. Anyway, Fidel is fighting for his life in the courts of the Batista government. And he basically turns the case around because the Batista government is basically charging him as a traitor to the nation. But Fidel turns the trial around and literally and very vividly demonstrates to the people that Batista's motivations are driven by greed and nothing more, that he's exploiting the natural resources of Cuba. Because as you remember, Cuba is one of the nations that produces sugar, and sugar is a big crop that the United States is exploiting in Cuba at this point. Well, Fidel uses that example to make the people of Cuba that are listening through the radio, through the media, about the real intent of Batista and how Batista, instead of running for another election, takes the power of the government through a coup, which is supported by the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, because the United States wants a puppet government in Cuba that they can control, and Fulgencio Batista is the puppet that they're looking for. And he's loyal, which makes him even worse. So this guy wants to be there. He wants to exploit the people in Cuba and wants to do it at the behest of the United States. And he's being successful about it. So anyway, Fidel is found guilty, even though he fought very elegantly and he turned the table around on the Batista regime. The court finds him guilty and he's sentenced to death. So in the process of him being transported from the jail to the field where they're going to execute him, because they were going to execute him by firing squad, he escapes. He receives help from the native people of Cuba who believe in Fidel's movement, and he seeks political asylum in Mexico. Mexico sees the struggle in Cuba and understands their compatriots in Cuba, or their fellow Latin citizens in Cuba, and openly welcomes Fidel. By this time, Che has made it to Mexico. Now we're talking about mid to late 1954, early 1955. Okay. In the city of Mexico, there's a big area of the city that you find a lot of Cuban citizens that are exiles from the Batista regime in Cuba that are now living in Mexico City, because Mexico City welcomes them. Okay, or not only Mexico City, but the Mexican government. Anyway, in this location, they have secret meetings where they're planning the return to Cuba and actively take the fight to Batista. So they meet, and in one night in 1955, in the summer of 55, Fidel meets Ernesto Guevara, which would become Che, and he likes him. Che is very charismatic, very well spoken, very well educated, and Fidel, being an educated man because he's a lawyer, so he has the gift of knowing how to defend himself through words, how to speak. So has a very ordered mind and can see and read people very well. Understands the value that Ernesto can bring to a fight of the character and the nature that he's trying to conduct in Cuba, and asks Ernesto pretty much openly to join his cause, and that he would take care of him and make sure that he's taken care of. So Ernesto decides to fight alongside Fidel, because by this time it's obvious what the American policy in Latin America is. Ernesto's not in accordance with that policy. Fidel is not in accordance with that policy. Fidel doesn't want the American government involved in the affairs of Cuba, and doesn't believe that the United States should be involved at all whatsoever, because they believe that Cuba should be a sovereign nation just like the United States is. So in mid-1955, they take off from Mexico, but while they're in Mexico, they receive training in guerrilla tactics by a Cuban general of the name Alberto Bayo Giroud, and he is a Cuban soldier who's exiled too with Fidel, and helps him train this guerrilla army, this guerrilla army that they have there in Mexico in guerrilla tactics. So by the time they leave Mexico towards Cuba, they're already trained. They have trained. They have the basic knowledge of how to conduct these operations, and they land in Cuba and begin the fight. They give Batista's professional army a fight, the fight of their life. The Cuban Revolutionary Army of the movement of the 26th of July, del Movimiento del 26 de Julio as they are known, they give the Cuban regulars a fight they will never forget. Little by little, they engage the Cubans and they defeat them, they win. As the months go by and the weeks go by, Fidel sees Ernesto's natural ability to be a good leader. He is an innate, charismatic leader. People gravitate to Che. And Che has a very, almost like a tuning fork or a sensing fork, if you want to call it that way, that he could read people and was a very good judge of character. You have to understand that Che's mind is trained intellectually different than Fidel's. Fidel was a lawyer, where Guevara was a doctor. So Guevara's motivation for education was to serve people, because he was one of the doctors or a person that studied medicine because he wanted to help his fellow man. See, so I want you to understand that distinction between him and Fidel, because the way their minds work are different. And that plays a very important role in the development of Ernesto as a revolutionary leader. Fidel sees this and appreciates this quality and makes Che Guevara one of the field commanders, because Che displays a talent, like I said, for command, for tactics, to getting the job done. He is the guy that Fidel has been looking at for years. They finally defeat the Batista regiment in 1959 and take possession of Cuba. Okay? By this time, the United States is paying attention to what's going on in Cuba. They don't like it. They don't like Fidel. They see Fidel as an extreme threat to American foreign policy, to American interests, to American economy in that area, and they start to give Cuba hell and making their existence a living hell, because the American government wants none of this, and they're afraid of Fidel because they know that they're communist. And as you know, the eagle and the bear do not get along at all. So Fidel makes Ernesto the minister of the economy, the minister of the agrarian. He's in charge of agriculture, of the economic development party in Cuba. So he's basically like the second in command in the government, in the new Cuban government. Che really doesn't want the position. He's not really into being a politician. He's more of a, let me get the bucket shaken and let's get things rolling, and then, I'll stand behind and work behind the shadows. That was more of Che's mentality. He never really liked to be in the limelight. Where Fidel, he wanted to be in the limelight. He wanted to be on the forefront of speaking to the world, right? In the mid 60s, we're talking about 1962, 63, Cuba starts to come around as a country that has a government who has freed itself from oppression, who has broken the bonds of the American imperialistic. They're not being exploited by the United States. They're not being exploited by their twisted philosophies and ideologies that they have economically, politically, and governmental. So there's no government influence in Cuba, in Fidel's Cuba. And the United States hates this. Because Cuba becomes a free nation, they now have a seat in the United Nations. And with that comes the ability to represent yourself, to speak at a international level, and basically tell the world what your philosophy is and what you recommend for the world community to do. Well, Fidel sends Castro to the United States in December of 1964 to speak in front of the United Nations. By this time, a lot of the countries in Latin America have accused Fidel and Che Guevara of being basically murderers, of being people that violate the natural rights or the civil rights of people, because Fidel orders Che Guevara to persecute all the people that were traitors during the Revolutionary War in Cuba and try them, execute them, and take care of them, basically kill them. Ernesto is in accordance with Fidel up to an extent, but he carries out his orders. So there's these trials, these executions that take place in Cuba, and Che clearly admits this during his speech in 1964 in the United Nations at the General Assembly. What's interesting about this speech is that nations are accusing Cuba of being a puppet, right, of the Russian Republic, or not the Russian, of the USSR. They're saying that they're being influenced by the communist ideals of Russia, that they're the new republic of a new communist republic of Russia in Latin America, that it is the threat of the bear and their influence and their evil ways are now a stepping stone that can be found in Cuba, while all these other countries like Ecuador and Panama and Costa Rica and Ecuador are accusing Cuba of all this. They're all puppets of the United States, because all the military dictators that are in power during that time have been put there by the United States. And Che addresses all these issues in his speech to the United Nations and basically tells the world that Cuba is a free nation, that Cuba will not put up with the influence of the United States, that Cuba is a socialist country who has the God-given right to rule itself as they see fit. So they basically tell the United States that the Cuban government is for the people and will take care of its people and doesn't need their help or their influence. They don't want nothing to do with the United States. As a matter of fact, they bring out all the dirty laundry the United States has in the area, and I'm talking about Latin America, in this assembly in his speech. Che talks about all the injustices on an economic, political, and government level that the United States has been conducting for years upon years, and calls these leaders out from all these nations liars, basically, and how they don't call things the way they need to, and how they lie and they twist the facts to try to support the policy of the United States, while Cuba is basically telling these countries that you need to wake up. You've been exploited by the United States for all these years, and you're not awakening at the reality of your gravity, at the reality of your exploitation, at why there's millions upon millions of your citizens leaving these native countries and going to the United States, because the United States has made life in all these Latin American countries so difficult and so dire that they're seeking better ways of living. And he says it very vividly to his to all these politicians in the United Nations. Well, you have to understand that by this time, Washington is so fed up. They're more tired of Ernesto Che Guevara than Fidel, because they understand that Guevara has a higher intellect than Fidel. That Guevara can speak more eloquently, more intelligently, and has the gift of driving his point unequivocally to the particular person or entity or government that he wants to. So the CIA basically makes Che Guevara their number one target, and begins to actively hunt for him. Guevara then, all these people, now you have to understand why Che Guevara is so dangerous to the United States, is because at his because of him speaking vividly and with candor at the United Nations, all these speeches are being, they're being publicized in radio. You could hear the speeches in radio. You could see that what the news are saying. So all this travels, maybe not as fast as it is now through the internet, but there was media at that time, newspapers, there was radio. So all that starts to travel, and by now, anybody who's listening in South America knows the Cuban struggle, knows about Fidel and Che Guevara's friendship, knows about what they accomplished and how they broke the bonds of the eagle in Cuba. So all these people that have been exploited for years by the oppressive foreign policy of the United States are listening now and are becoming aware of that. You know what? They can fight for what is right. So Che becomes an extremely dangerous threat to the foreign policy of the United States, because you don't have to understand that up to this point, there's been two ideologies that have been driving the United States foreign policy, and one of them is Manifest Destiny, which is basically a white European racist mentality that says that all white people have the God-given right to rule what they want, to conquer as they see fit, because God chose them to be the rulers of the world. So that, first and foremost, that is the primary ideology driving the United States foreign policy. And even till today, you still see that. The second thing that you have is the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, where basically the United States says to the European powers, you guys got to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. We have this hemisphere. We're the ones in control, and Europe can't be here and try to establish another seat of power here, because we are the top dog in this area. We're the ones that are in power, and we're the ones that are control whatever issues happens in this hemisphere. So all this ideology, which is oppressive in nature, if you really think about it, the United States has been driving for, middle of the 19th century up into the middle of the 20th century. So for over 100 years, American oppression has been felt and lived in South America. Che Ernesto Guevara represented a vivid threat because of his Marxist ideologies, because he believed that people had the God-given right to choose who ruled over them, to have the right to have a decent paying job, to have medical treatment that was affordable, to have a government that actually cared about its people and for their necessities. So all this came out of the Cuban Revolution, all this ideology, all this mentality that government should be there to take care of the people of their native lands. And Che Guevara stirred the pot per se, with all this mentality. Sadly, like anything that has a beginning, Che Guevara's life came to an end. He is killed in Bolivia, in the high mountains of Bolivia, because he leaves Cuba and leaves all that he fought for in Cuba to go help his Bolivian brothers in South America once again, to begin the fight again, because Bolivia is living the same thing, or is going through the same governmental process that Batista's Cuba was going through during the early 50s. What's important to understand here is that to Che Guevara, Latin America was not a conglomeration of countries. So in other words, when he saw Latin America, he didn't see Venezuela, Ecuador, Chile, Argentina. He saw one continent, one brotherhood of Latin Americans being oppressed by the same evil and corrupt government, who their only interest was to exploit the whole continent for its natural resources so they can progress economically, so they can progress politically, militarily, on a world scale. You understand that? The United States has abused and exploited all the countries in Latin America for its well-being at an international level. Never for just what was here locally. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because it has always done that. It continues to do that even till today. So the CIA is actively searching for Che Guevara, and they find him in the mountainous regions of Bolivia. He is killed on October the 8th of 1967 by Bolivian regulars, but that are equipped and trained by the CIA. I hope that me speaking to you today helped you understand the colorful life of Che Guevara, what his contributions to Latin America, why he is so beloved even till the day. I believe that he was a man of character, of integrity, that wholeheartedly died fighting what he believed in. Otherwise, I don't think he would have died in Bolivia the way that he did. They basically hunt him down and killed him like a dog. And all because he had the courage to stand up and say, no more. You know, we're done with it. We don't believe in this, and it's time for a fight. So because he demonstrated integrity, first of all, courage, and the care, the sincere care for his fellow man, the American government killed him. I hope that you liked my presentation, that you have learned something throughout this presentation. I'm not a professional video recorder or a professional historian by any means. This is just information that I have learned through my research, through my reading the material this semester, and I hope that it's been enjoyable for all of you. I wish you a very good day, and thank you for your time and patience. Bye-bye.